Hello. This morning I started to prepare this video. When I prepare a video, I usually do the research, prepare the script, then find the B-roll to be used in the final editing. I did all of this before I learned of the passing of Ozzy Osbourne. So I just want to say a few words to pay tribute to Ozzy before I start this video. Today is a sad day in music as we lost a legend. So in honor of the music of Ozzy Osbourne, this is the story of the album Sabotage. By 1975, Black Sabbath wasn't just fighting critics, record labels, or the changing music scene. They were fighting their own manager in court. While fans were waiting for the next heavy metal masterpiece, the band was drowning in lawsuits, betrayal, and paranoia. But instead of collapsing, Black Sabbath channeled all that rage and confusion into one of their most powerful and most overlooked albums. This is the story of how a courtroom battle nearly destroyed the godfathers of metal and gave birth to Sabotage. We begin the story around 1973. Black Sabbath was at a challenging point in their career. They were successful. They had already cemented their status as the pioneers of heavy metal. But all this touring and their demanding lifestyle were taking a toll on the band members. In November of 1973, the band released Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. This was a pivotal album for Black Sabbath, often considered one of the best. This came right after the success of Volume 4 in 1972. But Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath was a significant album because it showed them expanding the sound, and they were incorporating elements that fans would even consider to be close to progressive rock due to its complexity. There were tempo changes, different instruments, and even Rick Wakeman of Yes played piano on Sabracadabra. I'm telling you all this because this particular sound is going to evolve into the next album. But as I was saying, the years leading up to 1973 were very exhausting for the band because they had been constantly touring. They completed a world tour in support of Volume 4. This was also one of the points in time when the band was struggling with substance abuse. There was also one point when Tony Iommi reportedly collapsed at the Hollywood Bowl, and that led them to canceling the remaining tour dates. Ozzy Osbourne later stated that Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath marked the beginning of the end for the original lineup as he himself began to unravel after its completion. In 1974, they had to face one of the most difficult years. They were struggling, they felt they had lost their creative direction, and they started becoming suspicious of their financial situation. After releasing Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath and expanding their sound, they were pressured to innovate more. They were at a turning point. They didn't know if they should become more experimental or just return to a more straightforward, heavy sound. There wasn't a clear consensus on their next artistic step. Tony Iommi wanted to make a no-frills hard rock record for the next album, but that process ended up becoming more complex. The band was still exhausted. They had a long touring schedule and the aforementioned substance abuse issues. So this really affected the band. According to Geezer Butler, he said they were concerned, tired, drunk, and stoned. And this exhaustion and their altered state ended up giving them writer's block and difficulty concentrating in the studio. But they had another problem. His name was Patrick Meehan. He was a British record producer and manager of Black Sabbath for several years, starting around 1970. But Black Sabbath began to become suspicious about their finances. They felt they were being ripped off by Patrick Meehan, despite the immense commercial success. The band eventually filed a lawsuit against Patrick Meehan. The main accusation was against Patrick and his company, Worldwide Artists, and they were allegedly siphoning off a significant portion of Black Sabbath's earning. The band members found themselves with some suspiciously small bank accounts, despite being one of the biggest bands in the world, selling millions of albums and packing out arenas. They alleged that Meehan was withholding substantial sums of money that rightfully belonged to them. One of the biggest red flags for the band was Patrick Meehan's evasiveness and refusal to provide clear and detailed accounting of their earnings when they asked for financial statements. They were even either given vague answers or the documents were never produced. Then there was an incident in 1974 called the California Jam Incident. Black Sabbath performed in front of a packed show. However, The band members claimed they were each given $1,000 for the show, when they later discovered the actual payment to the management for their performance was around $250,000. This massive discrepancy solidified their belief that they were being cheated on when Black Sabbath decided to sever ties with Patrick Meehan in 1974. He allegedly fought back at them to retain control. Geezer Butler mentioned that Meehan tried to stop them from recording and attempted to freeze all their assets, essentially holding them hostage financially to prevent them from moving on. While all this was happening, they wanted to get out another album. The name of the album was Sabotage, released on July 28, 1975, also celebrating 50 years. The band chose the name Sabotage because they felt their creative process was being sabotaged by all these legal battles that were going on. In addition, the making of Sabotage was a nightmare. According to Tony Iommi, lawyers would frequently show up at Morgan Studios in London where the band was recording, and they would serve writs and subpoenas, which, interestingly, one of the songs was called The Writ. I'll talk about that later. One of the biggest challenges was the fact that band members had to split their time between the studio and the courtrooms, and this disrupted their creative flow and added immense pressure. It took them nearly a year to complete the album due to all these interruptions. This experience really impacted the band members in trusting their management. According to Bill Ward, he said it was easy for them to be exploited in their early career because the band members didn't really have a lot of business knowledge. Black Sabbath eventually succeeded in severing ties with Patrick Meehan. However, it wasn't a clean break. The resolution involved a payout to Meehan and significant legal expenses for the band. The battle left them financially depleted and emotionally scarred, profoundly influencing their subsequent artistic direction and reinforcing their distrust of the music industry's business side. The band eventually completed and released the album Sabotage, and many of the songs on the album were a direct result of everything going on with their legal problems. One example of this is the song The Writ. This is arguably the most direct example of the band's anger towards Patrick Meehan. Ozzy Osbourne wrote the lyrics for the track, which was something that was rare in and of itself, as Geezer Butler typically wrote most of the lyrics. According to Ozzy Osbourne, he said the lyrics were a bit like seeing a shrink, and that all the anger I felt towards Meehan came pouring out. The lyrics are very descriptive of Patrick Meehan and the manipulative nature of the music business. There are lines like, "Are you Satan? Are you man? You've changed a lot since you began, and you bought and sold me with your lying words." The music to the song has a very aggressive and manic feel. It has a very chaotic opening with lots of heavy guitar riffs, as well as Ozzy Osbourne's raw and emotional vocals. There was another song called Megalomania. This wasn't as direct as The Writ, but it's a song about betrayal and the struggle for control that the band was experiencing. According to drummer Bill Ward, he said that The Writ and Megalomania were connected. They both addressed the tension from their ongoing legal troubles. The lyrics are about being consumed by fantasies and schemes, the struggle for sanity and desire for escape. There were lines like, "Obsessed with fantasy, obsessed with my schemes, I meet reality with pseudo-mock dreams," and "Why don't you just get out of my life? Yeah, why don't you just get out of my life now?" These lines can easily be interpreted as the band struggling with the overwhelming pressure and feeling of being trapped by the situation and people controlling their fate. As for the music, it's a very long song. It's almost 10 minutes long. It shifts between the slow, brooding passages and faster, more aggressive sections, and this range reflects the emotional roller coaster the band was riding. There was another song called Hole in the Sky. This was the album's opener, and this has lyrics that are not really directly related to the situation. According to Geezer Butler, they were about environmental pollution, but it can also be interpreted as seeking escape from an oppressive reality. There were lines like, "I'm looking through a hole in the sky, seeing nowhere through the eyes of a lie," and that can be seen as a reflection of being trapped and unable to see a clear path forward, which was what was going on with the band. As for the song, it was very heavy. It had a driving rhythm and a powerful guitar riff, and Ozzy gave a very passionate vocal performance. There's one more song I need to mention. It's called Symptom of the Universe. This has lyrics that aren't explicitly about the lawsuit, but the overall feel of the song is reflective of the situation. I think the most iconic aspect of the song is the opening guitar riff by Tony Iommi. It has a guitar riff that's fast and aggressive and seen as a release of the band's frustration and anger. It's also cited as a direct precursor to thrash metal, so it's arguably one of the first thrash metal songs, but that's all a big debate, which I won't get into right now. The lyrics are more philosophical and cosmic. It's about search for truth and love is a symptom of the universe, which could be interpreted as a psychological escape from the reality of their legal situation. But it also shows how the band can be spontaneous with that second acoustic and jazzy part at the end of the song. This was reportedly something that was created spontaneously in the studio as an in-the-moment jam, and they ended up making it part of the final song. Finally, I want to talk about what happened when the album came out, because it got mixed reviews at first. Years later, it's now seen as one of their best albums. The main criticism upon its release was that they were comparing it to the more straightforward albums like Paranoid or the more progressive albums like Sabbath, Sabbath. So at first, critics found the album to be very chaotic. They also criticized the track Am I Going Insane Radio and thought it was more of a pop track or an attempt to chase radio success, and the fact that it didn't really fit the mood of the rest of the album. Critics also said that the album didn't have the same hits like the songs Paranoid or Iron Man, and the album was instantly accessible. Despite this, there was one Rolling Stone album review that said it might not only be Black Sabbath's best record since Paranoid, it might be their best ever. So that means not everyone had mixed feelings about it. Let me also mention the album art. I think people thought it was one of their weakest at the time, which might have influenced their perception of the album. You have to admit, these guys are wearing some very 70s looking outfits, but they were cooler looking at the time. But over time, it ended up being considered one of the most important albums, and that's because it's probably the last classic album of the Ozzy Osbourne era, because the albums that came out right after this, which were Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die, were considered to be weaker albums, and they changed their sound. They were reflections of the band in a really bad place. But this album, Sabotage, really shows the band in a difficult place, but still being able to deliver a really great album. I think this album has a very unique sound. It doesn't sound like any of their other albums. It still has some of those progressive elements that they were playing around with on the previous album, Sabbath, Sabbath, but also had heavy tracks like Symptom of the Universe, arguably their heaviest song that they've ever recorded, and other songs are very dark and experimental, and you can hear hints of what they would be doing later on the next few albums like Technical Ecstasy, especially on the song Am I Going? And that is the story of Sabotage. Let me know in the comments what you think of this album. Where would you rank it? Do you think it's one of the best albums of the 70s? And let me know your thoughts. In the meantime, check out a video I did on Sabbath, Sabbath. I did it a little over a year ago. It didn't get a lot of attention. I think it's a really good album, a really good review. I released it at the wrong time. I think I put it out in December of 2023, and I didn't get a lot of attention, but I've always thought it was one of my best videos, actually. So check it out, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. I will see you in the next one.